Include now. Brought to you by Even Break.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Include Now. My name is Adam Hyland and I'm the host for today. And in this episode we are going to explore the topic of health and inclusion. Why? Because we all have health. And our health matters in terms of our day-to-day activity, including being able to participate and thrive in the workplace. Today I'm joined with two amazing special guests that I will introduce to you shortly. But what is really exciting about this episode is that, and I guess I should say, is that we are combining the really important topic of health, but also our amazing guests are both working in the NHS, which is the National Health Service in the UK, and the NHS and all of its different functions are the fifth largest employer in the world. So it's really exciting to have a conversation around this topic. I'm delighted to be able to introduce Paul and Harjit today. So I'm going to start with Paul, if that's okay. If you could introduce yourself, Paul, and maybe talk a bit about your current role and why you got into this line of work.
Okay, thank you, Adam, and thank you for that introduction. And as you say, I work for the NHS. I'm lucky enough to work for an organisation called NHS Employers, which is the Employers Association for the NHS. So we represent the NHS and all of the organisations, roughly around 500 organisations across England. And we help them and support them and guide them really in terms of the whole human resources agenda, so the whole workforce agenda. So how can we create good workforces and good workplaces for people? And it's a real privilege to work for them. Your question about how did I get into this field is really interesting, actually, because I think, like a lot of people, actually, I don't know whether it's peculiar to the field of equality, diversity and inclusion, but I didn't really choose to come into this area. I got that classic tap on the shoulder about 20 years ago, actually, which was really interesting because, for me, what that said to me, when I've reflected back on it, what it said to me was, at the time, somebody saw something in me that I probably didn't see in myself, because I hadn't genuinely thought about diversity and inclusion as a career opportunity. But somebody said to me, I think you'd be really good in this job. And I thought, okay, I'll try it. And it sort of went from there, Adam.
Amazing. And I'm certainly glad that the person that did tap you on the shoulder say what they said, and that's amazing. And what a huge remit you have in your current role in terms of supporting so many NHS organisations for their HR and inclusion agenda. So thank you. Well, Harjit, it'd be great if we could hear a bit about you and your current role.
Thank you. So my name is Harjit Bansal. I work for North East London Foundation Trust. It's one of the NHS trusts that Paul was talking about. Your question around why I joined the NHS, I came from Kenya about 35 years ago, and my first job was in Newham Council for Racial Equality. And having come from a culture where we didn't talk about race or racism, we didn't talk about disability, those are not topics that we generally talked about. So when I joined the Newham Race Equality, I really got to understand the concept of discrimination for different groups of people. And that really interested me, and I wanted to learn more about it. I wanted to increase my knowledge around it. So I was only there temporarily. I think I landed in England on a Friday. On a Monday, I went to sign in to Job Centre, because that's what you did when you came from other countries. You signed in to go in, and the Job Centre then helped you find a job for you. And that's how I started my first job in the council, but it was a temporary job for about 6 months. And after that, I started applying for permanent positions, and I ended up, a bit by default, like Paul said, I ended up in the NHS. But I was really, I think my passion is around equality, because of the country that I come from, where I didn't see much of it. There were different reasons behind that, but I was doing a degree in public health, and I was doing a module on equality and diversity. So that's how it got me really interested in my job as equality and diversity, and I work as head of equality and diversity in Nelft.
Amazing, and I know you've done some fantastic work in your life, and it's class that I'm sure we'll hear even more about that as we continue the conversation. One thing I should say is we certainly did not plan to all be wearing a maroon colour top, but I feel like we're certainly on brand today, so that's great. One thing that we are doing for Include now is we are having a feature which is called 3 questions in 3 minutes. I just want to get to know you as guests more, and to start the conversation off. So I've got 3 questions for you. I'll probably ask Paul and then Harjit the same question, then we move on to the next question. So, are you ready?
We're ready.
We're ready.
The first question is, who is your leadership idol?
Well, it's funny you should say that, Adam, actually, because you mentioned the colour of our vest, yeah? My hero, my leadership hero, is Arsene Wenger, the former manager of Arsenal, who wear red, of course. I know it's not quite this colour, but this is their away kit, actually, is maroon, I think. So Arsene Wenger, and I thought of him, and I always think of him, actually, when I think of leadership, because if you go back to, he's got a very good reputation now, but if you go back to when he started, when he came to Arsenal Football Club, which is a huge venture. You know, you talk about big companies and big, the NHS being 5th largest in the world. Arsenal Football Club is a global phenomenon, and he's come in as a manager to manage. He had very little experience. He was a real unknown entity, but he came in, and he didn't just come in as a manager. What he did was he changed the whole structure and the whole infrastructure of Arsenal Football Club, right from the top to the bottom. So he got the club to look at its whole purpose and ethos as an organisation. What were they there to do? What were they there to? Who were they there to serve? What community were they serving? And he also looked at the health and well-being of the players as well. And he introduced a whole new health regime for the players. And of course, all of that led to some great returns. And so the reason I think about him when anybody asks me about leadership is because I often see those traits, and Harjit will have seen it as well, in good chief executives, good boards that come into organisations. They don't just make small changes, they make big changes, and that's when change really happens.
Thank you. I've got a feeling that Josh might have something to say about Arsene Wenger in the after party. We're waiting to see on that one. Harjit.
So mine is Martin Luther King, and I'm saying that because I think it's Black History Month, around his reasons behind his commitment to social justice, but also leading a whole nation, I think, all over the world in terms of taking people along with, civil rights movement, but also having protests that were not were non-violent. So I really, thinking about the recent events that have happened, I was thinking, gosh, if we had Martin Luther King here, who did far more than what we did in the last couple of years, was having those protests that were non-violent. So that, and he took a whole nation with him. He took the world with him.
Yeah.
As a leader.
Can I just say, because I've noticed we've both said male leaders,
Male,
and I was
Woman.
actually going to say, but I forgot to say, I do also admire Serena Wiegman. Talking about on the football theme, Serena Wiegman was the England women's football manager, and she came in a similar vein actually to Arsene Wenger. What he did, I think she did a similar thing with the football team as well.
Yeah.
And again, she just shook the whole thing up,
And brought the World Cup back.
Yeah.
Made it.
Yeah.
Thank you. So let's listen. What was the last book that you read? Let's start with Harjit.
Okay, thank you. So the last book that I read was Brown Girl Like Me by Jasprit Kaur. I think it was really an inspirational book, and I related quite a lot with some of the cultural aspects that she talked about. But she talks also about her mental health, which I think was a very powerful chapter within her book. So yeah, Jasprit Kaur.
Yeah, and she did a podcast as well, didn't she?
She did a podcast, and we invited her to come and talk to our staff in Nelft during World Mental Health last year.
Thank you. Paul.
So, the last book I read was called Kafka on the Shore. So it's a 2002 novel, and it's by a Japanese author, and his name is Haruki Murakami. And it was fascinating because I like books, I like music, I like art, so I'm very sort of into the sort of creative arts, and I'll often listen to music, and I'll listen to a song, and I'll think to myself, oh, I wish I wrote that song, I really wish I'd written that. I don't often do that with books, but I read this book by a Japanese author, and it's very much a Japanese story, and when I finished it, I thought to myself, I really wish I'd written that book, And I'm not going to try and describe the book to you because it is one of the bizarrest books I've ever read. To give you a flavour, there's a character in there who talks to cats, and there's a character in there who is a transgender librarian, just randomly. And there's also two characters as well from World War II, which sort of gives you a bit of a clue because there's a lot about Japanese history in it as well. And there's a lot in it about the Japanese psyche and culture. And I think that's what fascinated me, actually. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for saying that. And then the third question is a question that we're asking previous guests to leave as a question to ask the next guest. So we will ask you later what question that you like to leave. But for now, in 30 seconds, he says, not long, can you tell us about an achievement that you're really proud of? Let's start with Paul this time.
Okay, thank you, Adam. I struggled with this. I always struggle with this question actually because there's things that I've achieved. There's probably more that I can achieve actually. I can't really think of an achievement, but what I can think of are pivotal moments in my career. And one of the most pivotal moments that I often go back to actually, I've talked about it a lot, is when I was a HR director in a children's charity, Bernardo's. I was working, and I was fortunate enough, I've never had one since, to have a secretary. I've never had a secretary since. And I had a vacancy for that position, and it went out to advert, and we had a deaf applicant put in an application. And for all sorts of reasons, there was lots of scepticism and lots of challenge from the team about whether or not they should be shortlisted and interviewed, etc. I don't know why, I just really stood by it, and I said, we must interview this person. We did interview her, and we also appointed her as well. And the 2 or 3 years that I worked with her was the hugest and was best learning experience I've ever been on. She was a fantastic secretary. She was really young at the time. She had very little experience. She was Asian as well, so she had other challenges. But her primary challenge was the fact that she was profoundly deaf. And she was working in a secretarial role, which this is 25 years ago, probably, when the technology wasn't quite what we've got at the moment, and it just changed my whole perspective on what was possible. It showed me what was possible in terms of employment, and I think it set me up actually for the rest of my career.
Where it just shows us how talent comes in so many different diverse beautiful forms and individuals. Yeah. And then I did over the year.
So I think mine was last week.
Wow.
Last week we were shortlisted for an award for a leadership program that we developed in-house in Delft. And it's a leadership program to develop, we call it Global Majority Network. We don't call it BMANA anymore. So the Global Majority Network. And we won the award. So we were outstanding organization for delivering an outstanding leadership development course for our staff within NEL. So I think I was quite proud of that.
Yeah, you should be.
Yeah,
absolutely, and huge congratulations.
Thank
That's
you very
amazing.
much.
And hopefully we'll hear a bit more about that as we go on. Amazing. Thank you. So we're going to delve into a bit more conversation now in terms of looking at help and inclusion, how the NHS fits in and has a huge impact on people's lives and their ability to work in the UK. I guess for me, as someone who identifies as a disabled person, the medical model has created barriers for me in terms of attitude, in terms of aspiration having maybe. Now, I guess it's a weird position because I love the NHS, and the NHS has supported me and so many friends and family. But this medical model, when we come to looking at disability, does create barriers around attitude. We have the social model where we're shifting the narrative away from the individual on how society needs to remove barriers. I'm really intrigued to hear from both of you on how you think, or where you think the balance is between obviously needing vital healthcare and medical intervention versus not medicalising so-called disability and where we can integrate the social model more. So, really intrigued to get your insights into that. I don't know whether Paul, you want to start first?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Adam. It's, you're asking that question, and obviously I'm responding to it in a medical context, and it's a medical model and a social model. And therein lies the problem, actually, because that medical, I talked earlier about the Japanese psyche. I think in a way there's almost a psyche within the medical and nursing profession about disability, and for them, I'm going to make a very sort of general statement here, but for them, somebody with a disability is somebody that they want to fix, to use a very simple term. And I think that's where all of the problems actually derive from. Having said that, I think the training and the education now, for doctors in particular, but also for the nursing profession as well, is to take a very different approach when it comes to disability. And quite rightly, we're, as you said earlier, we are the fifth largest employer in the world. We are the largest employer in Europe. We're the largest employer in the UK. And, you know, that brings great responsibility. As an employer, you know, we have to make sure that we are fulfilling our social duties, not just because of the Equality Act, you know, which we are, we've got the duties under the Public Sector Equality Duty, but just because it's the right thing to do. So but having said that, so when it comes to employment issues, a lot of my colleagues working in the human resources field, they are the ones obviously who have to address all of these challenges when it comes to employment. So for them, I think it's, when you come to disability, for me, in terms of balance, your question was about balancing. How do you balance that medical model and the social model? And I think there is, for me, there's a reality. You know, there is to that medical model. There is a reality for people with a disability. You know, that it affects your day-to-day living. Yeah, and you can't disregard that. That's a reality, and we have to take that into account, obviously, in terms of our employment practices and the way that we interview people, etc. And that's why we have reasonable adjustments, and that's why we ask people, do you have special requirements, for example, if you're coming to interview? So we have to take account of that. But essentially, as you said, Adam, the real problems start, and it again, it goes back to almost to that interview that I talked about earlier when I decided to interview the deaf applicant. It's about, you know, how do we overcome those social stereotypes and those social norms that we've all got in our heads, that tell us a deaf person can't be a secretary, yeah, or a person in a wheelchair can't be a doctor, or can't be a nurse. You know, we know that these things are possible. You know, we've seen and we know, and you know, we've employed lots and lots of people now who, if you said to the average person on the street, do you think that, you know, a blind person could be a surgeon, for example, might say no. But you know, with technology these days, everything is possible.
It's not, I guess it's not just possible, is it? It's needed. We need that diversity for and that lived experience to continue progressing in the medical profession. Yeah, amazing. Did you have anything to add on that?
I was wondering what I could add to what Paul has just said. I think obviously, I was going to say, I guess both elements of both the medical and the social are really important. They're critical parts of anybody's recovery, because you might have some physical disabilities that sort of require the support of medical intervention. But I think we focus a lot more on medical intervention than we do on the social aspect of things. And how can we change that? I mean, I think in the NHS, we talk a lot about collaborative working. So whenever we are devising a policy, when we are thinking of redesigning services, how do we collaboratively work with the patients or people with disabilities? And I think learning disabilities is a really good example around how we deliver services for people with learning disabilities when we are thinking of mainstreaming them. So not having special schools, but mainstreaming children into education, thinking about, you know, when they're accessing mental health services, that there isn't a very specific service, but it's mainstream services. So that collaborative working, that partnership working, making sure that there's a voice that is heard of disabled people within our policy and our development. Training, I think, is really critical. You know, how do we increase people's knowledge and skills around working with all disabilities, not just one? And I was thinking even with neurodiversity, it is quite complex, but it's how do we ensure that our professional staff are as well trained around working in those environments. So I think the focus, if you want to mainstream around looking at the whole picture rather than focusing on the medical diagnosis of the patient, will have better outcomes. They're more personal-centered, they're more person-centered. So I think in terms of the NHS, we need to push that a lot more. We've got the NHS plan, we've got so many legislations, but I think there's still lack of evidence that that is fully embedded across all organisations at every level.
Yeah.
So
And
I think that would be my spin on it.
And I was going to say, on the learning disability front, do you use Project Search?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, you do. I mean, they're a great example, aren't they? Project
Yeah.
Search are a great example of how, around learning disabilities, that model has been applied, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, absolutely.
And I think, from my perspective as well, having a lived experience is, I think, the voices of disabled people need to be more integrated into the medical decisions that happen, because I think, whilst I'm certainly not an expert with my lived experience of cerebral palsy, and quite frankly, doesn't interest me if I'm honest, other than what barriers do I need to remove to participate. What I am an expert in is how my diversity impacts me and my day-to-day living. I think there's still a bit of a way to go to ensure people's lived experience is also represented and heard in the decision making when it comes to medical decisions. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. There's this thing about, I want to be treated the way, no, I would treat you the way you would, I would treat you the way I would like to be treated. That's a sort of a golden rule, isn't it? I think with disability there should be this platinum rule that treat me the way I would like to be treated. So rather than you making that decision about how I would like to be treated, ask me, because I know my diagnosis, I know what works and what doesn't work for me. So there's something about us changing that mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you think disabled employees are impacting the work of NHS? Because, I don't really have kind of data around how many people have shared that I identify as disabled in the NHS. But because the NHS is so big, it's not a minority conversation. This is affecting the lived experience of NHS workers. And having a lived experience of disability is huge, whether we identify publicly with it or not. So, but I guess my point being, in the long-winded ways, there will be thousands and thousands and thousands of disabled people working in the NHS.
Yeah.
What contribution do you think that is making?
Yeah. Huge contribution, Adam, as you say. In terms of the numbers, what we know formally, like in our formal HR systems, like people who declare that I have a disability, it's roughly somewhere between 5 and 7%, which is not a reality. We know that, and we know that's not a reality because we also do every year a staff survey, and in the staff survey, which is anonymous, so people don't have to declare anything formally, but we do ask people to identify themselves against a number of demographic categories, so race, gender, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, for example, as well. And in that survey, we roughly every year get about 20 to 23% of staff who declare themselves as having disability. So I always work on the basis that around a quarter of that 1.3 million staff that we employ, so again, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people have a disability. So that's the starting point. In terms of your question about how have they contributed, for me, the biggest contribution actually has been through the intersectionality lens.
Yeah.
And I say that, and I'll explain that, because you'll know as well as I do that there's such a wide spectrum of disability. We use that category disability. I mean, it's just a huge spectrum of people that covers. So what I say to myself is, and we talked about phrases, you've heard that phrase before, if you've met somebody with autism, you've met one person with autism, but for me, I apply that to everybody actually with a disability. So if I've met one deaf person, I've met one deaf person. Everybody's got an individual element to them. Everybody has got their own unique needs and requirements, etc. And I think for me, that's what the disability community have brought to this agenda around equality and diversity more widely. They've done that primarily as well through staff networks. So there's been a huge growth in staff networks across the NHS and across lots of organisations, because you talked about voice and you talked about being able to speak up and give your view. We actually, in the benchmark that we use for disability, which is the Workforce Disability Equality Standard in the NHS, there is actually a measure in there of how do you listen to the voice of disabled staff. So we are actually trying to measure and assess that in our benchmarking systems, which I think is really important.
Indeed, and I just want to pick up on something that Paul has touched on, and we get down to that, the why. It's quite clear that there's a big difference between 5 and 7% compared to 23%. Why?
Yeah, why do we have that difference? So I mean, just picking up on all the stuff that Paul has said, I think we've had the workforce race equality standards for quite some time now. And I mean, we have this conversation. So we have about 4 or 5 different disability networks. So we had the overarching neurodiversity staff network. And then below it, we have got the mental health staff network. We've got the dyslexia and Pacific learning disability network. We've got the autism network. We've got the hearing support network. And last week, we launched the sight and sound support network. So, and the reason why we did that, because when it was just neurodiversity, a lot of people were saying my voice is not being heard. So and I know some people will say, why have you set up all these separate staff networks? It's because we wanted to make sure that we were hearing everybody's voice, because there were different needs depending on the disability. So I think that voice at the table is really critical, and they contribute quite, during COVID, I think when COVID happened and we shut down, we had changed our style of working. So we had all gone virtual. And actually it was staff with disabilities, disabled staff who had told us, actually, we are not reaching out to them. We are not communicating with them. Our systems didn't allow us to communicate and so our systems were not accessible. So I think we learned a lot through the networks around how we could make virtual webinars more accessible. I remember doing a lot of work around software and updating software, having transcript. Our webinars now, if you come to any of our webinars, there's a transcript there, and we've had sign language interpreters on there. So I think that voice has really helped the NHS change systems already, and we need to build more on that, because I think that's not the end of the story. That's just the beginning of the story. 2 of our board members openly declare every month we have a corporate induction where new starters come in, and both of them share their disability. So one's got a long-term condition because she's got cancer and she's a medical director, and we've got an executive director of HR who's got a hearing impairment. That's what he says he's got. So he talks about them. So I think having those role models, hearing those stories, and I always say it's not a lived experience, David. It's actually a living experience, because you're living with it every day, and it's what you share with us and increasing that knowledge. So I think those things, having a voice at the table, having that voice that is heard within the organization is a critical way, and I think that's how they're contributing and making changes to our systems.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to the next feature of Ingo now, which is called Beyond the Buzzword. And I think within the kind of inclusion and diversity sphere, there's a lot of buzzwords that seem to coming out of fashion. I think they can mean everything, but they can end up meaning nothing. Today's buzzword is self-care, and I've had a conversation with Megan, a producer, on self-care, and I think when we were talking, what was clear was self-care has almost turned into bubble bath and hot chocolate. And whilst that might be a useful tool in self-care, I think the focus and the meaning behind it has strayed somewhat from something that is really meaningful and really important. Just really quickly, I guess, what does self-care really mean to you?
I agree, Adam. I mean, I like a bubble bath and a hot chocolate as much as anybody, you know, but for me, it's not about physical things, actually. I think it is for some people, and that's fine, but for me, it's not about physical things. It's about almost a philosophy, actually. Yeah. For me, it's about being mindful. And it's about being mindful about yourself, but also your well-being, but also being mindful about others as well. And I say that because whether you manage a team or whether you're in a team, if that team isn't mindful of each other and looking after each other, then they're not going to work together, they're not going to be productive, and they're not going to be a happy workforce. Yeah. So you've got to create, if you're the manager, you've got to create an environment whereby people are mindful of each other, think about each other. It's that philosophy thing. And then check out with each other as well, that people are comfortable. And it's an ongoing process as well. It's not a one-off thing, you know. A cup of hot chocolate will make you feel nice for 10 minutes, but you'll soon need another one, you know.
Yeah. Really, everyone has a right to self-care. Yeah. And I think within leadership, and especially within, I think, inclusion and diversity professionals, we forget to apply the same thing that we're asking our colleagues to do, which is to practice self-care, and you can't fill someone else's cup if your cup is empty. Wow. If it's okay, I'm going to move on to the next and final part of the episode, which is your workplace doing enough? Because I know that you've done some fantastic work in your life, and it's just so be good just to hear as we kind of conclude today's podcast, just hear the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, I think I'll reiterate it again. I think there's a lot more we can still do. But I think we have done quite a lot in terms of shining the light on ensuring that we are inclusive in the organization. So every year we assess ourselves against some of the indicators like the workforce disability equality standards and some of the other equality strands that we have. We were very privileged about 2 years ago to win the Reedy recruitment award, and I think that really motivated us even more to do more. So it's reaching out to communities. I was really pleased after the Reedy award. We actually, when I looked at our data, we have recruited in the last year. We have recruited more than 300 people who have declared a disability at the point of appointment, and for me, I think that is a great achievement that we are attracting, because when people are seeing all of that on our websites, they're seeing that we have all these networks in the organization. I think they're more inclined to come and work for NELFT, because NELFT is an inclusive organization for disabled people. The other thing we do, David, is when people apply for a position in NELFT, there's a contact number for them to call us if they want us to make every sort of reasonable adjustment for the interview. So we will extend the interview. We will give them the interview questions before. We give them a day or 2 days in advance, but we make sure if they need support like a lip reader or speech or any of those reasonable adjustments, we put them in place. And I think that's a phenomenal achievement, because not many trusts have got that in place. So I'm really pleased with the work we're doing. But there's so much more to do. There's absolutely loads more to do.
Amazing. It doesn't sound like now. Definitely including now.
Yes,
Which
thank
is
you.
great.
Thank you very much.
I guess on that note, we will conclude today's podcast. What is really clear is that NHS are doing so many fantastic initiatives to make recruitment and retention of disabled staff better and better. The fact that, NHS, which is the fifth largest employer in the world, has at least 25% of their workforce identifying as disabled on the staff survey, really shows the impact and the need for diverse and disabled candidates in the workforce. So, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and share and check out the After Pod with George. Bye for now.